Right now, a college quarterback in Texas is worth more in endorsement money than most NFL backups. A volleyball player at a mid-major school has a bigger social media deal than some professional athletes, and none of that was legal just 5 years ago. This is the real history of NIL, name, image, and likeness, and how we got from a system that banned college athletes from earning a single dollar off their own name to a multi-million-dollar industry with lawsuits, settlements, and an entirely new enforcement agency built just to police it. If you're a student athlete, a parent, a coach, or just someone trying to understand why college sports looks completely different than it did a decade ago, this is the video that connects every dot. The court cases, the state laws, the NCAA policy changes, and the settlement that rewrote the rules in 2025. Let's start with what NIL actually means, because a lot of people still get this wrong. NIL stands for name, image, and likeness. It's a legal right every person already has, the right to control and profit from your own identity. If a company wants to put your face on a poster or your name on a product, they need your permission, and typically they pay you for it. Every regular person in America has always had that right. College athletes for nearly a century did not. That's the part that's easy to forget. This was a new right being invented. It was an old right finally being restored to a specific group of people who'd already been excluded from it. Because the NCAA's amateurism rules said that receiving pay in any form connected to your sport made you a professional, and professionals weren't allowed to compete in college athletics. Most histories of NIL start in 2009, but there's an earlier case almost nobody brings up. It involves an Olympic skier, Colorado football team, and a fight the NCAA almost lost 5 years before anyone ever heard of the name O'Bannon. Most of the 20th century, the amateurism model held firm. Scholarships covered tuition, room, and board. Everything else, jersey, sales, television revenue, video game likenesses, went to the schools, the conferences, and the NCAA. The athletes generating that value saw none of it, and for decades, courts mostly let that stand. Jeremy Bloom is the guy who once broke it wide open in 2004. Bloom was a two-sport phenom, a World Cup champion, and Olympic freestyle mogul skier, who was also a wide receiver and a return specialist for the University of Colorado football team. NCAA rules actually allowed him to be a professional in skiing while staying an amateur in football, as long as he didn't take any endorsement money tied to skiing. The problem for a mogul skier, endorsements were basically the entire paycheck. Prize money alone couldn't fund an Olympic career. Bloom asked the NCAA for a waiver. Twice they said no. So he sued the NCAA and the University of Colorado and Colorado State Court, arguing he was owed the benefit of a rule that was supposed to let him do exactly what he was trying to do. It wasn't framed as an antitrust case. This is a breach of contract argument, built around Bloom's status as a third-party beneficiary of the NCAA's own bylaws. He lost. The trial court ruled against him, and in 2004, the Colorado Court of Appeals affirmed it, finding Bloom hadn't shown a strong enough chance of winning to justify blocking the NCAA's rule. He gave up his final season of college football, testified before Congress about how non-transparent the NCAA's internal appeals process had been, and went back to skiing full-time. The NCAA won that fight cleanly, on the legal theory Bloom chose, but the underlying complaint that amateurism rules made no sense in a modern commercial sports landscape didn't go away. It just needed a stronger legal argument. 5 years later, it got one, and it came from a much less likely place than a courtroom, a video game console. Ed O'Bannon was a UCLA basketball legend. He led the Bruins to a national championship in 1995 and was named the tournament's most outstanding player. Years after he's retired, a friend showed him a college basketball video game, and there he was. His likeness, his jersey number, his exact playing style, all rendered in the game without his permission and without a dime of compensation. O'Bannon became the lead plaintiff in a class action lawsuit against the NCAA, and he wasn't alone for long. Basketball legends Oscar Robertson and Bill Russell joined the case. This time, the argument was different from Bloom's contract claim. The NCAA's rules banning athletes from profiting off their own image and name amounted to an illegal restraint of trade under federal antitrust law. In 2014, a federal judge agreed. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals later upheld that ruling. It didn't hand athletes a full NIL system overnight. The remedy was narrower than that, but did something more important than any single case it managed before. It was the first real crack in nearly a century of legal protection the NCAA had relied on. Courts had finally said on the record that amateurism rules aren't automatically exempt from antitrust scrutiny. That crack turned into a much bigger break 7 years later in a courtroom O'Bannon never set foot in. 2021, case called NCAA versus Alston reached the U.S. Supreme Court. First time the court had taken up the NCAA case in nearly 40 years. The question was narrower this time. Could the NCAA limit education-related benefits like paying for a laptop, funding a graduate scholarship? The court ruled unanimously 9-0 against the NCAA. But the headline wasn't really the ruling itself. It was Justice Brett Kavanaugh's concurring opinion, where he went further than anyone else on the bench and said the quiet part out loud. That the NCAA's remaining compensation rules look like textbook price fixing. That they're trying to justify it by calling athletics a special, non-commercial product wouldn't hold up much longer. He put the rest of the NCAA's amateurism model on notice. One of the people who reacted publicly to that ruling was Jeremy Bloom, the same skier the NCAA shut down back in 2004. He called it a monumental day for student-athlete rights, watching the same organization that ended his college football career finally get told by the highest court in the country that it wasn't above the law. Within weeks of the Alston decision, the NCAA didn't wait to find out if Kavanaugh was right. But actually, the NCAA didn't move first. The state legislature did, 2 years earlier, and it forced everyone else's hand. September 2019, California signed Senate Bill 206, known as the Fair Pay to Play Act. It passed unanimously, every single vote in both chambers. It did something no one had ever done. It made it illegal for California colleges to stop their athletes from earning money off their own name, image, and likeness. The law wasn't set to take effect until 2023, giving schools time to adjust. They didn't get that long. The moment California passed this law, other states realized their own schools would be at a massive recruiting disadvantage if athletes cash in on NIL deals in California, but not at home. Florida, Colorado, Nebraska, and others rushed their own versions through. Within 2 years, dozens of states had some form of NIL law on the books, all within different rules, different disclosure requirements, and different timelines. It became a patchwork, and that patchwork put pressure on the NCAA to act nationally before this situation spiraled further out of its control. So on July 1st, 2021, the NCAA adopted an interim NIL policy, allowing college athletes nationwide to finally earn compensation for endorsements, appearances, social media activity. For the first time in the association's history, college athletes could legally profit from being who they are. What followed is often called the Wild Wild West era of NIL, and that description is fair. There was no federal law, no uniform national rule book, and no consistent enforcement. Boosters started forming NIL collectives, donor-funded groups built specifically to pool money and pay athletes, often to attract recruits or keep players from transferring. Within just a few years, the total NIL market grew from under $1 billion to well over $2 billion annually, and collectives came to dominate the vast majority of that spending, far more than traditional brand endorsement deals ever did. It worked in the sense that athletes finally got paid, but also created exactly the kind of chaos critics had predicted, recruiting that increasingly looked like bidding wars, wide disparities between football and men's basketball versus every other sport, and a growing sense that the NCAA had opened a door it had no real plan for policing. That set the stage for the next major legal earthquake. That earthquake is called House versus NCAA, and it's the single biggest turning point in this entire story. The case actually combined 3 separate lawsuits, House, Hubbard, and Carter, all arguing the same core point. The NCAA had illegally blocked athletes from sharing in the massive media rights and licensing revenue that college sports generate, going all the way back to 2016. Rather than risk a trial that could have produced even higher damages, the NCAA and the major conferences chose to settle. On June 6, 2025, a federal judge granted final approval. The terms were historic, roughly $2.6 billion in back pay to be distributed over 10 years to athletes who competed between 2016 and the settlement date. But the back pay number is only part of it, and going forward is where everything really changed. Starting with the 2025 to 2026 academic year, schools that opted into the settlement were allowed, for the very first time in NCAA history, to share revenue directly with their athletes. Not through a booster collective, not through a side deal, but straight from the athletic department's own budget. The initial cap was set at $20.5 million per school, tied to a percentage of Power Conference athletic revenue, and it's built to increase every year for the full 10-year life of the settlement. Here's the distinction that trips a lot of people up, so let's make it simple. There are now 2 separate buckets of money in college sports. One is revenue sharing, money a school pays directly to its own athletes, capped and reported. The other is third-party NIL deals, outside brand deal endorsements, and collective payments, which still exist but now face real scrutiny. That scrutiny comes from a brand new organization created specifically because of this settlement, the College Sports Commission. Its job is to police the new system and it's built a platform called NIL Go, where athletes are required to disclose any outside NIL deal over a certain dollar threshold, so it can be reviewed for a valid business purpose and a fair market value. Since launching, NIL Go has already processed tens of thousands of deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, clearing on most of them, but denying a meaningful share for failing to meet the new standards. This is the enforcement error of NIL. It's just still being written in real time. So where does that leave us right now? Unsettled, honestly, and that's not a criticism, it's just accurate. The back pay portion of the House settlement has faced appeals, and pieces of the new associated entities rule have already been challenged in court, with mixed results so far. Eligibility fights are also very much alive. Vanderbilt's quarterback's lawsuit over how junior colleges count against NCAA's eligibility has already won him an extra playing time through a court injunction, and it's since expanded into a proposed class action that could reshape eligibility rules for every JUCO transfer in the country. Nothing about that is finalized. Congress has tried repeatedly to pass a single federal NIL law to replace this state-by-state patchwork and repeatedly failed. Bill known as the SCORE Act Clear Committee got scheduled for a House floor vote multiple times and was pulled each time for a lack of support. As of mid-2026, attention has shifted to a new bipartisan Senate proposal, and the White House has also issued executive orders aimed at stabilizing college sports. Though an executive order can't override state law or grant the NCAA antitrust protection the way an actual state statute could, whether any federal NIL actually passed and what it would look like if it did remains genuinely undecided. What is settled is this: the assumptions that shaped that video game controversy back in 2009 are completely gone. College sports now run on direct school payments, disclosed third-party deals, a dedicated enforcement commission, and a legal landscape that's still actively shifting under everyone's feet, athletes, schools, and families included. If you're an athlete already fielding NIL interests, a parent trying to understand revenue sharing before your kid signs anything, or a transfer portal athlete trying to figure out what actually applies to you, this is exactly the kind of landscape where having someone who actually understands the legal side matters, not just the recruiting side. That's the work we do at Panel Sports Groups out of Atlanta. If you want to follow a video on how any of this applies to Georgia high school athletes specifically, or how revenue sharing deals get reviewed, drop it in the comments. Subscribe for the next one, because if this year's proved anything, it's that this story isn't finished.